there's a type of game that we recognize in seconds. You step into an open world, pick a random direction, and out of nowhere, 3 hours vanish. Skyrim became synonymous with this. A 2011 action RPG that drops you into a massive map and lets you ignore the main quest for as long as you want. And if you are part of the crowd that loves that feeling of freedom, of exploring mountains, caves, and cities, just because today I've set aside 10 new games that deliver that same energy, each with its own flavor. Some lean more toward fantasy, others bet on choices and factions, and there are even those that hook you just by making you want to explore just one more corner. So, adjust your gear, grab your potions, and let's get to the list. If you love Skyrim, you need to check out these 10 new games.
Paths through light.
Crimson Desert is a game for those who truly enjoy open worlds. A single-player adventure from Pearl Abyss, the folks behind Black Desert, set on the continent of Pywall, focusing on exploration, intense combat, and a grounded medieval fantasy vibe that is brutal when it needs to be. It arrives on the 19th of March, 2026, for PC, PS5, Xbox Series, and also Mac. So it's a major release, yet I still feel like many people are letting it fly under the radar. What grabs me most here, as someone who went crazy for Skyrim back in the day, is this promise of freedom and rewarded curiosity. The idea of traversing very different regions, stumbling upon cities, ruins, and wilderness, and always having something pulling you in for just one more hour. The game follows Cliff, a leader and central figure linked to the Greymanes, in a world in conflict, where a threat called the Abyss begins to invade Pywall, with fragments falling and people wanting to exploit them, and the story scales from local trouble to something continental. And yes, it has that massive world ambition, with the studio itself comparing the size to giants of the genre, which matches the feeling Skyrim gives when you pick a point on the map and just go. Now, if you're expecting Skyrim with swords and magic exactly the Bethesda way, adjust your expectations. Crimson Desert is officially marketed as an action-adventure, open world with more physical, cinematic, and hands-on combat, featuring traversal that includes horses, climbing, and even gliding. Recent materials also show large-scale events like sieges and fortresses and missions that vary between the epic and the personal, besides promising that as the story progresses, you unlock other playable characters with different styles. And there's a detail I think is important. Many people call it an RPG, but there is public discussion precisely because the progression seems more gear, upgrade, crafting focused than a classic RPG of choices and attributes. So I would go in expecting an action open world with systems, not a pure roleplay simulator. To me, the Skyrim appeal here is less about copying the format and more about capturing that hunger for exploration. You get lost, find hidden things, see a point of interest, and forget the main quest for a while, because the world feels like it has its own history. The gameplay trailer makes it clear the studio is betting heavy on immersion, scale, and impactful brawling, with a tone of a saga written in blood that fits a continent at war. If you enjoy picking up a game and living in it for weeks, mentally noting places to return to later, Crimson Desert looks like exactly that kind of addiction. Gothic 1 Remake is a project developed by the Spanish studio Alquimia Interactive and published by THQ Nordic, with a release date set for the 5th of June, 2026 for PC, PS5, and Xbox Series. It is a complete reconstruction of a 2001 cult classic created by Piranha Bytes, a game that influenced an entire generation of RPGs at the time, but that almost no one outside of Europe actually got to know. The story throws you into a penal colony called the Mining Valley, a prison surrounded by a magical barrier that one day went out of control and turned the place into absolute chaos. You are the nameless hero, a prisoner thrown into this hell with no tutorial, no on-screen indicators telling you where to go, no hand-holding, and no mercy. There are no glowing icons on the map guiding you. You need to use your own eyes and intuition, exactly like old-school RPGs did. And look, I know that sounds frustrating at first, but it's that feeling of real achievement that makes you unable to put the controller down. What gets me most excited about this remake is that the team didn't throw away the essence of the original, quite the opposite. The world is now 10% to 30% larger than the 2001 game, with new areas to explore. The NPCs, about 600 of them, have unique faces and their own routines. The world literally exists without you, as they work, fight, and interact even if you aren't around. The orc culture was expanded with the help of a real linguist, and even a tattoo artist advised the devs on character art. This is an absurd level of dedication that few games have today. Technically, the game runs on Unreal Engine 5 and looks visually impressive, even if the demo released on PC, PS5, and Xbox showed some fine-tuning still needed for controls and animations. Combat has been redesigned with animations that vary according to your character's skill level, and the crafting, cooking, and weapon forging systems have been expanded. If you enjoy the freedom of Skyrim but always missed an RPG that treats you like an adult, doesn't lead you by the hand, and has a world with its own personality, Gothic 1 Remake is exactly the game you didn't know you were waiting for. The new Fable, the reboot, is being made by Playground Games and published by Xbox Game Studios, with a release window for autumn 2026 and a day one arrival on Game Pass, in addition to coming out for Xbox Series, PC, and also PlayStation 5. And yes, the proposal here isn't to be Skyrim with another skin. It's to trap you in a fairy tale full of personality, where the absurd and the epic walk hand in hand. The point is that Fable has always been about choices and reputation, but in the most human way possible. You change how people see you, how certain situations unfold, and even the mood of interactions in the world of Albion. It's an action RPG, but with that British wit, jokes in the middle of danger, and a fantasy vibe that doesn't take itself seriously all the time, and that's what makes it stand out among so many open worlds that feel like an apocalypse lecture. I really like this energy, because when it works, every side quest becomes a story to tell, not just a to-do list. As for the game itself, the reboot takes place in Albion and is described as a new beginning for the series, with a new story instead of continuing the old timeline. Playground has shown trailers with melee combat, magic use, and classic enemies returning, and the overall tone mixes adventure, spectacle, and that feeling that the world is making fun of you while you try to be a hero. It has also been confirmed that Eidos Montreal is supporting development and that the game has important characters introduced in the previews, reinforcing that they want narrative and charisma, not just a big map. If Skyrim is that fantasy of you against the world, serious and imposing, Fable is the fantasy of you against the world, and the world trolls you back. I think that's exactly why it could become your next addiction. It gives you freedom and exploration, but seasons everything with humor, choices, and social consequences, things that make every moment feel more personal, more yours. The Blood of Dawnwalker is a project by the studio Rebel Wolves, founded by the former director of The Witcher 3, who decided to assemble a team to create something that blends strong narrative, an open world, and a very distinct day and night mechanic. When I heard that The Witcher 3 and vampires in an open world RPG had the same creative father, I was already intrigued. And then the trailer arrived, and I got really interested. You control Cohen, a young man transformed into a Dawnwalker, a creature that lives between the world of humans and vampires. During the day, he is more human, focused on sword combat, directional blocking, and the use of magic called Hex. At night, he literally becomes the monster humanity fears, with vampire abilities, claws, bites to recover health, and even vertical movement on walls. The game is a third-person action RPG with 3 skill trees to explore, and the way you use these abilities totally changes how you face enemies and environments. Personally, I really like this idea of having 2 states so different, sometimes being the classic hero, sometimes embracing the more brutal side and exploring everything vampire power offers. The setting is a fictional kingdom called Sangora Valley, located in the Carpathians, inspired by folklore and Balkan culture, with a very Gothic and medieval vibe where war, the Black Plague, and shadow creatures rule through people's fear. This is where my RPG fan side comes in. The game isn't just a big world, it's a narrative sandbox where your choices decide the direction of the story, which missions you accept, how you solve them, and to what extent you become more human or more vampire. The clock counts 30 days and nights for you to complete the main objective, and only actions that move the plot forward make time pass. Exploring the map at your own pace doesn't accelerate this, so you can get lost in the story without that feeling of being forced. In terms of tone, The Blood of Dawnwalker seems to be that game that mixes the weight of a medieval world infested with war and plagues with the narrative freedom of a Western RPG, while throwing in a dark and personal side, since the story revolves around Cohen's family and his own identity. If you enjoy RPGs that let you make tough decisions with real consequences, and, on top of that, give you a combo of swords, magic, and vampirism, this is exactly the game Skyrim fans need to try when it arrives. If you enjoyed Skyrim for the addiction of exploring and getting stronger your own way, but are tired of more of the same in medieval fantasy, you need to keep an eye on Phantom Blade Zero. It is a wuxia action RPG with that martial arts cinema enemy made by S-Game, and it already has a date, the 9th of September, 2026, arriving on PC and PlayStation 5. The story revolves around Sol, an elite assassin linked to an organization called the Order, and the game puts you in a race against time. He has 66 days to live to clear his own name and dismantle a conspiracy. This already changes the atmosphere, because it's not a comfortable journey, it's a dark and paranoid fantasy where every place seems to have a layer of lies over it. I really like this kind of hook, because it creates narrative urgency without needing to trap you in infinite cutscenes. In terms of gameplay, Phantom Blade Zero is about style and precision, but without becoming a test of patience. You equip 2 primary weapons and 2 secondary weapons, the Phantom Edges, switching between them in combat with a system of blocking, parrying, and dodging, plus a resource called Shachi that feeds into heavy attacks and defense. The world is described as semi-open, with connected regions and paths that open up non-linearly, and the campaign has 8 endings influenced by side quests. What gets me here is the promise of a game that wants to give you RPG freedom and reactivity, but with fight choreography that looks like an old Hong Kong movie, only playable. And if you're coming from that Skyrim feeling, the most honest comparison is Skyrim gives you adventure and exploration with a focus on roleplay, while Phantom Blade Zero wants to give you a world of intrigue to investigate and combat you'll want to master for pure mechanical satisfaction. It has also been confirmed as a PS5 console exclusive for 12 months, so other console versions like Xbox will only come after that period, at least. If you like games that make you train, learn enemy patterns, vary weapons, and still reward you with progression and multiple endings, this is the type of must-know that isn't an exaggeration. Clockwork Revolution is a first-person steampunk RPG with time travel and choices that actually affect the world. The game is from In Exile Entertainment, Xbox Game Studios, and so far has no officially announced release date, only confirmation that it arrives when it's ready, possibly this year. What is already set in stone are the platforms, PC and Xbox Series, with a day one release on Game Pass. The setting is Avalon, a Victorian steampunk metropolis, where the elite flaunts fancy clockwork prosthetics and the city runs on exploitation, propaganda, and social control. The big villain, at least from what has been shown, is Lady Ironwood, who uses time travel technology to rewrite the past and ensure the top stays on top, while the rest of the city swallows smoke and humiliation. You play as Morgan Vanette, a customizable and voiced protagonist who stumbles upon this truth and joins the fight to fix the timeline in your own way. I really like this premise because you can feel the game wants to talk about power and inequality without losing the entertainment value. The mechanic I find most insane, in a good way, is the chronometer. You travel back to past versions of Avalon, change events, and return to the present to see the damage or improvement happening in the city, the districts, and the people. This isn't just dialogue choices. The idea is that your alterations can have small or massive effects, changing social conditions and even the lives of specific characters. And since it's a first-person action RPG, it mixes gunplay with era-appropriate weapons, steampunk gadgets, and a heavy focus on customization, including weapon crafting, modification. To me, it's the kind of system that turns into gold when the game lets you experiment and doesn't punish you for playing around. If Skyrim was the fantasy of being no one and becoming a legend, Clockwork Revolution seems to be the fantasy of being no one and becoming the system's #1 problem. Because you literally mess with history and watch the city react. It also promises a very deep character creation system, described by the devs as something expensive and detailed, with NPCs reacting to your traits and stats, which is the kind of detail that gives an RPG its soul. It's not yet possible to say it's coming in 2026 for sure, as that hasn't been officially confirmed. But the amount of gameplay shown and Xbox's positioning make it clear they are preparing for a major launch.
Oh no. What did I do?
Any last words before my friend puts one in your scalp?
Outward 2 is the kind of RPG I recommend without a second thought to anyone who loved Skyrim for the I got lost on the map and that's where the game truly began feeling. Only here the fantasy is much more grounded and the world doesn't treat you like a chosen one. It is planned for release in the third quarter of 2026 on PC. And the proposal is to continue being an open-world survival adventure RPG, the kind where you learn more by getting beaten than by winning. What makes Outward 2 special, and hardly anyone is talking about it compared to the AAA noise, is that it embraces the idea of an adventurer simulation. It's not just bandits and monsters that threaten you, but hunger, disease, and the weather. And the game insists that victory is something you earn, not something it hands to you. To me, this hits differently because it changes how you explore. Every trip becomes a mini plan, every cave becomes a bet, and returning alive already feels like an achievement. And that's where the seasoning I think is perfect for those coming from Skyrim comes in. Freedom to build your style, but with harsher consequences and more locked-in choices regarding what you can master. On the official website, they say the combat has been expanded compared to the first game, and that in Outward 2, the number of skills you can learn is limited, so you really need to choose your path, whether as a warrior, an archer with traps, or a mage who grows by using sigils. ArcheAge Chronicles is that new fantasy world I think is perfect for hooking those who love Skyrim for the freedom of exploration and the feeling of living an adventure your own way, but with a different flavor. Here, the ambition is to be an online action RPG with a persistent world and a focus on community. It was revealed at the State of Play and is officially the next chapter in the ArcheAge series, formerly known as ArcheAge 2. What excites me most is the promise of a large, connected, open world. Built from scratch in Unreal Engine 5, with that fantasy that makes you want to just walk aimlessly to see what's over the next hill. In the press release, they mention varied biomes, forests, deserts, cities, and even treacherous seas. And this immediately gives me that journey energy that so many people associate with Skyrim, but in a setting designed to have MMO life. And here comes the part that, for me, defines whether you'll love it or not: the combat. ArcheAge Chronicles promises a dynamic and overhauled combat system, combining strategic depth with faster action, which sounds more like player skill than that traditional tab target approach many people avoid today. One side I think few people are talking about, which could be the big differentiator: economy and social life. They list a player-driven economy as a pillar, with houses, customization, and crafting professions, alongside social and community features in a world that changes with the players. So it's not just an RPG to beat, it's a place to live for a while if the loop grabs you. If you're the type who spent weeks of your life inside Skyrim, losing hours, discovering caves, building crazy setups, and getting attached to landscapes that felt alive, I'm almost absolutely certain that Monster Hunter Stories 3 will hook you the same way. The game arrives on March 13 and brings a turn-based RPG proposal that, in a way, captures that same sense of freedom and discovery that made us disappear for hours in the lands of Tamriel. The story takes place in the Kingdom of Azuria, years after a tragic event that put the country on the brink of collapse. And you live as a writer prince who needs to understand a mysterious phenomenon that is threatening to wipe out entire species of monsters. There's politics, dilemmas, strategic choices, and cool weight of the world depends on you that strongly reminds me of those epic Elder Scrolls moments. What caught my attention right away was how the campaign has real scale. Unlike its predecessors, where things started slowly with that learning to be a hero air, here you start as an experienced one, 9-year-old knight, and the narrative begins on a larger dimension. The proposal is for you to feel satisfied when the credits roll, without depending on post-game to justify the journey. We're talking about roughly 30 hours for the main story alone, but easily over 50 hours if you enjoy exploring, doing side missions, and managing your team of monsters. The rhythm is more mature, with twists that greatly expand the plot's possibilities and battles that require constant planning. The combat system maintains the strategic, turn-based DNA of the series, but with new layers that make everything deeper. You fight with a team consisting of yourself, your main monster, and a companion by your side, being able to swap between up to 6 monsters that you carry into battle. The bond and trust system remains the soul of the game. Unleashing more powerful attacks depends on letting your monster act more freely instead of controlling every turn. There's a new Wyvern Soul meter that, when emptied, leaves the enemy vulnerable to coordinated group attacks. For those who like building teams and thinking about elements, weaknesses, and synergies, this part will strongly remind you of that pleasure of creating specialized builds in Skyrim. But where the game truly shines for those who enjoy that explore, discover, and see the world change, loop is in the exploration. Each region has different ecosystems, monsters that migrate between habitats, and time mechanics that bring specific dangers and opportunities. At night, invasive monsters appear, threatening to wipe out entire species, and you need to intervene to save the balance. The loop of searching for eggs, hatching, raising, and repopulating areas is addictive, and gives that feeling that your actions leave real marks on the map similar to when you reclaimed positions or shifted the balance of power in Skyrim. Only here, instead of political reputation, you are building bonds with giant creatures that fly, swim, and fight by your side. If you miss an RPG that makes you feel like part of a living world, with visible consequences to your choices and a scale that respects your time, this might be exactly the game you've been waiting for. Lords of the Fallen 2 is the kind of sequel I feel will fully hook those who had a long Skyrim phase, mainly due to the dark fantasy atmosphere and the promise of a world that swallows you whole and doesn't apologize. It arrives in 2026, and from what has been officially shown, the idea is to take everything that worked in the 2023 game and make it more ambitious, more brutal, and with more narrative and exploratory presence. The point that draws my attention most and gives that must-know feeling is the identity of a world in two layers. The game plays with the coexistence between Axiom, the world of the living, and Umbral, the world of the dead, and this becomes a central mechanic for exploration, danger, and reward. PlayStation itself describes the Umbral Lamp as a pass between realms, with hidden paths, strange treasures, and nightmare creatures, though staying there too long has consequences because the darkness notices you. And there's a lore detail I think is great for selling the atmosphere. Lords of the Fallen 2 takes place 100 years after the events of the previous game, with the umbral calamities spreading and the veil between worlds becoming thin, to the point where horrors cross from one side to the other. To me, this is the kind of hook that works perfectly for a Skyrim fan. It's not just more monsters, it's a world in decay, with a sense of constant threat and that curiosity to explore ruins and discover what went wrong.